For our final installment talking about the Chesapeake Colony, we want to look at the pivotal year of 1619. All right. Remember, the Jamestown settlers arrived in 1606. They went through a period of a starving year. They went through a nightmare. But by 1619, there was a settlement established. There was an influx of settlers arriving in Jamestown, and this was a very pivotal year for not just the settlement's future, but the colony's future, as well as the British colonies and America's future. One of the main reasons why this was so pivotal was they created in this year of 1619 the Virginia House of Burgesses, which is going to be structured very similar to the British Parliament. All right, there's a they don't call it a House of Commons, but there's a House of Representatives, and there are the upper house. All right, so there's two houses, one of the aristocrats, one of the commoners that are elected, and really, I guess the best way of explaining it is this is important because it provides some structure in terms of government, but also sets the precedent, for self-government. All right. So later on, when we talk about the American Revolution and why the colonists felt that they were different or independent from the British, it all begins here with the Virginia House of Burgesses and this establishment of self-government. All right. Again, one of the reasons why the Parliament is going to allow Virginia Company to organize this House of Burgesses is really, as it's stated here, is to control the finances. As I mentioned yesterday in in our screencast, there's going to have to be some bureaucratic control over the colonies that the mother country can't handle. And so this is just one of those ways. By allowing the colonies to establish their own government structure with the overseeing by a royal governor, it's the best of both worlds, so to speak. Okay. And as you see here again, by the end of the 16th century, the House of Burgesses, they're going to be able to create their own laws. There is a royal governor, and mainly it's going to be controlled by the leading planters or the aristocrats, and they're going to act like the House of Lords. All right. And again, as it's stated at the bottom there, high death rates are going to ensure rapid turnover of members. Okay. Now, James I is going to take control of the Virginia colony. This is going to be a result of the Glorious Revolution in the 1680s. James I comes to power in England. He doesn't like the freelance government or the freelancing of the different colonies in North America. So he wants to try to consolidate his power. All right. So he makes Virginia a royal colony. All right, and he really distrusts what is happening in North America, especially in Virginia, primarily because of the amount of wealth that they're generating from the sale of tobacco. He feels that they're a threat to his position within Parliament, as well as his position as King of England. Right. Now, another reason why the year 1619 is so important is that it's the first year for the arrival of Africans. All right. Understand at first, Africans weren't necessarily brought over as slaves. Some of them actually came over as indentured servants. Some of them were actually slave traders themselves. But it will be the first arrival of of Africans, in Jamestown. All right, and again, like I said, their status is a little bit unclear. All right. So you see here the population by the, 1700. There are a substantial amount of Africans in the colonies at this time, even though the white population is still significantly higher. All right. Now this is just a little review. We talked about the Atlantic slave trade. Um, and when we talk about that triangular trade between goods from the Americas to Europe to Africa, this is a good little breakdown by what each group traded with Africa. It's not necessarily important that you know the finer details of glass beads came from Venice, or flint rock, flop, flintlock muskets and gunpowder, but get a general idea of what the important goods were that were traded with Africa for slaves. All right. Again, we talked about the Middle Passage, how the slaves came over, or the Africans, I should say, came over to North America. I definitely like this side view here, so you can kind of see how they're structured and how they're laid out. Now, when we talk about colonial slavery, as the numbers of slaves increased, white colonists reacted to put down the perceived racial threat. All right. Early on, and we'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow, but early on, white indentured servants and slaves worked side by side. And one of the reasons for the growth of African slaves and the end of indentured servitude happened to be because of the intermarrying and the intermingling of the whites and Africans. And so those high up in the church really were cautious and didn't disapproved, I should say, of the intermingling between the white indentured servants and the African slaves. Another reason for the growth of slavery in the colonies was that the indentured servants, because there was a 5 to 7 year window that they had to work, they're expendable, meaning that the owners would treat them rather harshly, and they would beat them, they would accuse them of crimes, they would accuse them of destroying property, add years on their life. They wanted to get the most out of them in the 5 to 7 years, that they would treat them as horrible as possible. They would treat slaves, African slaves that were there for a lifetime, better than the indentured servants, because they knew that the indentured servants were going to leave eventually. Now, and kind of try and tie this all together, but the white indentured servants also were able to escape to other towns, and it was rather difficult to locate and to identify the runaway indentured servant. Whereas the Africans, they didn't speak the language, they didn't know the culture or the customs. If they ran away, they were easily able to be spotted within another town or village or borough or whatever. Okay, but what happens is, with these perceived racial threats, that slavery is going to transform from this economic institution to become an economic and racial institution. They're going to find ways. White colonists are going to find ways to identify slavery as a black or African institution. Right. In fact, Virginia, in I believe it's 1634, will be the first colony to identify Negroes as slaves. Maryland will be the second one in 1666. All right. By 1662, we have the foundation of what's called slave codes, which pretty much made blacks and their children property for life. All right. And as you see here, this will again be a reoccurring theme, but these slave codes will eventually turn into black codes after the Civil War. These are all ways to pretty much limit the ability of Africans to learn how to read and write, uh, force them to try to assimilate at a lower status in society. Now, what happens with the influx of African slaves is that you have a number of indentured servants who now don't have land, don't have money, but are free, and really don't have any support groups. All right, and so they're going to be treated harshly by the aristocratic planters. They don't have jobs now because they're being replaced by African slaves, and so they become frustrated. All right, and so you have large numbers of young, poor, discontented men in this Chesapeake area. All right. By 1670, the Virginia Assembly is going to disenfranchise, meaning they're not going to allow anybody who doesn't own property to vote. Okay, so that's going to make the situation even worse. Now, what happens is one of these indentured servants, freed indentured servants, is going to be a man named Nathaniel Bacon. In 1676. He's going to be so frustrated with the lack of opportunities for these freedmen that he's going to lead 1,000 Virginians in a rebellion against Governor Berkeley in Williamsburg. Okay, mainly the main reason for this is Berkeley has ties with the Indians in the West. All right, and so Nathaniel Bacon requested land for the freedmen to go out west and grow and become self-sufficient on their own. But Berkeley, trying to appease the Indians in the West and prevent hostilities between the denied Bacon and the freedmen that opportunity to go there. So Bacon took it out on Berkeley. All right, the rebels again kind of just identified this, but Nathaniel Bacon really saw this as Berkeley's trying to make an economic decision. That way he can exploit the Indians and dominate the fur trade. Okay. So you see somewhat of Bacon's rebellion. Right? He is going to push himself further west outside, and then you see kind of like this is their campaign. They're going to go attack natives as well as whites. Okay, Governor Berkeley is going to be driven from Jamestown. They're going to burn the Capitol down. They're going to plunder. Really, Bacon leads this whole thing, and then once he gets a fever and dies, what most suspect to be pneumonia, it's going to squander this rebellion, and then Governor Berkeley is going to be able to lead a counterattack and crush the rebellion. All right. And so Berkeley's result of this is this fault line where settlers cannot move further west, any further west than this line right there, the red line. Now, to finish everything up for today, the results of Bacon's rebellion are pretty substantial. Even though it's a small rebellion, it's pretty substantial because it really exposed the resentments between the frontiersmen and the landless former servants. Okay. It also is going to distinguish this, not only the socioeconomic class differences between the rural and the urban communities, but it's also going to intensify the resentment between the rural whites and the natives. Okay, and what happens is that this is going to push the upper class planters to search for those less likely or able to rebel, and that's going to be black slaves. All right, we'll stop there.